Georgia has a very real opportunity to do this on Saturday if it wins the game. If it wins the game against the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, I think that we're looking at a very, very high chance that Georgia ends up with a top 4 seed and a bye in the college football playoff, at foregoing the campus games in the first round. I just have a hard time seeing it otherwise. But I will talk about, what scenarios could that not happen, right? But as long as Georgia beats Georgia Tech in Mercedes-Benz Stadium this Friday, I think Georgia's chances to end up with the top 4 seed in this playoff bracket is extremely high. And it will depend on some of the things that the committee could decide, and I'm going to talk about that as well. But the Dogs are sitting pretty right now. Just got to go and take care of business in clean, old-fashioned hate and get that done. And we're talking about a lot of time off and a lot of rest and a lot of preparation for what's next. And I think that Kirby Smart and this Georgia program would probably appreciate that, despite what happened to all of the teams that got their byes last season, right? Oregon and Georgia and Arizona State and Boise State, right? Is that what happened? I can't even remember now, but I know that it was Arizona State, Georgia, and Oregon. They were outmatched in those games. They were outmatched, and Kirby was outcoached in Georgia's game. Ryan Kelly from Dawg Post talking about college football playoff scenarios. We talk about that a lot here at Dawg Post. Sales Hatch, it's down below. Make sure you're checking them out. I will have them barcoded for you to check them out. One of our partners here at Dawg Post. Georgia is going to be number 4 in the college football playoff rankings when that comes out this week. It hasn't come out at the time I'm recording this, but there's no change in the top 7, I'd say, or probably the top 8, which is Ohio State, Indiana, A&M, Georgia, Texas Tech, Ole Miss, Oregon, Oklahoma, Notre Dame, Alabama. Top 10. The top 10 will remain the same, I would imagine, heading into this week with the college football playoff rankings. So, if Georgia wins, it's not going to move down, right, against Georgia Tech. It'll be looked at as a good win for Georgia. So they're not going to move down from 4. So then the question is, do they play in the SEC Championship? Well, this is what happens if Georgia plays in the SEC Championship. Either Auburn beats Alabama or Texas beats Texas A&M. Well, if Auburn beats Alabama, it doesn't affect Georgia as much. If both of them happen, then Georgia's in a really good position. But if Texas beats Texas A&M, Texas A&M is going to fall in the rankings, and Georgia's going to be ranked ahead of it. And then we're talking about Georgia heading into the SEC Championship as the number 3 team in the country. Even if Georgia loses that game, if it's a tight game, I would say, against Alabama or Ole Miss, then I don't really see Georgia falling in the rankings. I think they'll still be a top 4 team. Now, maybe the way that the committee could justify doing that is Texas Tech is right behind the Dogs in the rankings, wins out and wins the Big 12 championship in a really big way, right? And they say, man, Texas Tech deserves to be one of the top 4 teams, and they're their conference champion. They've got a big win. That's the only scenario really where I could see them sliding in front of Georgia. But if it's A&M that loses, Georgia would have to fall multiple spots for that to come to fruition. Ole Miss is behind them and won't have the ability to get up unless they're beating Georgia head-to-head in the SEC Championship. Oregon, I don't think has a shot at the Big Ten Championship anymore, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know what it would take for them to climb up. Oklahoma doesn't have an opportunity to climb over Georgia. Notre Dame doesn't have an opportunity to climb over Georgia. I look at this and I say, if you're Georgia and you win this game against Georgia Tech, I don't think you're going to have a campus game. I just don't. Now, here's the other part of it. And maybe the committee justifies this somehow. Georgia's not in the SEC Championship, right? They're ranked number 3 or number 4 heading into that weekend. It's Texas A&M versus Alabama. What if Alabama beats Texas A&M? How would the rankings work that way between Georgia, Alabama, and Texas A&M? I think the committee would have some decisions to make in that scenario to where it would be difficult. I think it would be difficult for them at that point. If Alabama is 11-2 with a win over Georgia, won the conference championship over an A&M team that was undefeated. Alabama would go up in the rankings. Would they be one of the top 4 teams if they're ranked around 10 right now? Would they fly up 6 spots and jump Georgia? Would Texas A&M drop? We got a little bit of a precedent last year when Georgia, Penn State, Texas, and Oregon were all ranked in the top 4 after being in the conference championship games. And they didn't really punish them losing. Georgia went ahead of Texas. They ended up being the number 2 team. They kept Texas and Penn State at 3 and 4. Maybe that was flipped. They didn't punish them. So that precedent has been set. Would they not punish A&M? The thing is, I have a feeling that there will be a little bit more that goes into it with these conference championship games. Now that they're not necessarily for playoff spots, I do think they might have a little bit more influence in the rankings, to be quite honest. I think that if Alabama were to beat the brakes off A&M or something, they'd really consider putting them up in the top 4. I think if Texas Tech, I think they could rise, right? Like I was saying, if they have a really huge win. Will Indiana or Ohio State get punished if they're both undefeated and play each other in the Big Ten Championship? I have a hard time seeing either of them fall out of the top 4. I just don't think that would happen. So for Georgia, I think you do examine this entire situation, and you're in a pretty good position. In terms of, okay, do you want Georgia to play in the SEC Championship? Do you want them to have a playoff bye? I think the answer is yes and yes and yes for a few reasons. One, if you're a Georgia fan or you're just a fan of college football, you should want your team to be in the conference championship. You should want them to have an opportunity to play for that trophy. It's a meaningful game. I understand that the injury risk is kind of the only thing. And if you believe in more time off, then that's kind of anti that. Well, I think that a bye is good. Last year happened, and it was bizarre, where Oregon and Arizona State lost to a better team in Texas. Oregon lost to a better team in Ohio State. Georgia lost to somewhat an evenly matched team probably, and got outcoached and had Gunnar Stockton as a first-time starter, and only a few weeks to prepare for that, right? Those teams lost games that weren't crazy to lose, and they were on neutral sites. Just because you get a bye and you're not warm, I don't think that's a real problem. The 14 college football playoff was this way before, where those games were played 3.5 weeks, 4 weeks after the conference championship weekend. So we're talking about maybe Georgia having an extra week off. Does that affect the Dogs if they don't play in the SEC championship and still end up as a top 4 team? And then it's this Friday, what would that be, 4 days from now? The Friday the 28th to either the 31st or the 1st being the first game. I don't think that'd be a real problem. We saw in the 14 playoff that this was just kind of how it was. And Georgia has performed really well in all 3 of those games. Georgia made the 14 playoff 3 times, so we're just getting historical with it now. Georgia won the Rose Bowl. Georgia won the Peach Bowl against Ohio State. Georgia won the Orange Bowl against Michigan. They did play conference championship weekend all 3 of those years, but we're talking about an extra week off if Georgia doesn't make the SEC championship. I do look at all of these scenarios, and I really think that Georgia has a legitimate chance to have a playoff bye, being a top 4 team. Just because you wouldn't be punishing Georgia, but if you would be putting people ahead of it. Now, all of this is a moot point if they lose to the Yellow Jackets. I don't know if winning the SEC championship will propel them up to the top 4 if that's the case. So Georgia has to beat Georgia Tech. I think that does happen. But these scenarios are very interesting at this point in the season. Georgia's got the top 4 have it better than anyone else. Between Ohio State, Indiana, Texas A&M, and Georgia right now, they are in the best position. Texas A&M's going to win this Saturday too, or this Friday night as well, to keep the same sentiment. Excited for this week. Excited to eat some Thanksgiving food, watch some football on Friday, and then watch a lot of football on Saturday. We'll see you in riding home and everything that we do.